When I met Oliver a few months ago, he admitted at once that he didn't know anything, almost nothing about widescreen history at all. And I said, that doesn't matter because I know a little bit about it, and there are lots of people who knows a lot about it.
But I gave him my books.
But we like to know about you as a person. So he volunteered for an interview in biffen.eu in Copenhagen. Now I'm doing it again in Danish.
Oh,
No, in English.
English, yes.
Oliver understands Danish, and he speaks Danish.
Excellent.
And excellent. And for our English guests, this is a short Q&A with Oliver, and will be in English, I think.
Yeah.
Would anyone mind if it's not in Danish? Okay, we'll do it in English.
Yeah, that's good.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and why your family moved to Ireland.
I was, it's a bit loud, but I'm trying to keep my voice down. I was born in New York, and my family lived there. My father was running his production company as it was. And in the early 70s, I was very young. I have a lot of older siblings. My family moved to rural Ireland. And that's where I grew up. And most of my older siblings, in fact all of them at some stage, moved back to the United States after they had finished school, and I did the same thing, but my father and stepmother lived the rest of their lives in rural Ireland.
Do you know why you moved to Ireland?
There are various versions of it, one of which is, I think, at least one of the things he claimed was the election of Richard Nixon. The re-election of Richard Nixon was disturbing enough that he thought it's time to leave.
Oh, wow. That's a good thing.
I think it probably had a lot more to do with the death of my mother, which was sort of a fairly dramatic turning point in his own life. And I can't say I know very much about his sort of thinking in business terms at that point, but he certainly, once he left New York, stayed pretty far removed from the movie and entertainment business. So I think that was part of it. He was awfully young to be thinking of retirement, but that was pretty much the way he behaved once he had left the United States.
Okay. And what did he do in Ireland? You mentioned a story about your some homework you got.
Yeah. Well, this was I think I was in, I don't remember exactly what year it was, but I was 8 or 9, so 3rd or 4th class or something like that. And I was in a really small school. I think our whole year group was maybe 15 students. And if not all, certainly almost all of my classmates were the children of farmers. So we got the homework assignment, what does your dad do? And that's a fairly typical question for an Irish family at that point, because not very many women would have been employed. So I went home and I asked my dad, and Dad, what do you do? And his answer was, well, I probably call LA a couple of times a month. And I realized that he didn't really do anything beyond that, and I was of course mortified with embarrassment, because I realized everyone else in my class, my dad wakes up at 5:30 in the morning, he milks the cows, and then he goes out and spreads some fertilizer, and then he comes back in and weeds So he didn't do very much, to be honest.
Okay. But how did he finance that?
Well, that's a good question, and we talked about this once before, no one in my family really knows what the sum was, but it's understood or assumed. When my grandfather died, he was on a rather upturn of events in terms of finances, and his life seemed to have been quite a roller coaster of bankruptcy and wealth. And so when he died in that plane accident, I think my father inherited half of his worth, and Elizabeth Taylor inherited the other half, and I guess we lived on that for quite some time.
Okay. For around the world in 80 days, that was
yeah,
the fortune.
exactly.
Yeah. How did you discover that your dad and your granddad sort of had a background and be actually also very famous in the movie industry?
It's funny, I was just thinking about this today. I was thinking, it's funny to be at a 70 millimeter or widescreen film festival and be hearing all this about my grandfather, because really he was a Broadway producer. And certainly the first things that I was aware of, aside from a bunch of Academy Awards on the mantelpiece, which I did become aware of, were mementos from his days in Broadway. And there were cigar boxes and gifts and plaques, things that my father had kept and took with us to our home in Ireland that mentioned a lot of Broadway shows. So I sort of recognized, oh, well, that's something not particularly related to farming in the southeast of Ireland. But I would say the thing that really impressed upon me, and I didn't know what they were for quite some time, was we had, I presume, mostly replicas of the, and I still honestly don't remember the number, 5, 6, or 7, or maybe 8 Academy Awards that Around the World in 80 Days won. And they were on the mantelpiece. And at some point, it entered my consciousness, well, that's not something you see in very many homes. So, I mean, also, and it was a very sort of bizarre, in some sense, childhood. It wasn't bizarre to me because that was my childhood, but the dinner conversation was always about, I didn't know that they were celebrities, but celebrities that my father and grandfather in particular had hung out with and associated with and worked with. But that was dinner conversation as opposed to just the weather or the news of the day. So it was, my childhood was, I was brought up hearing anecdotes about whomever it may be, whether it's Denham Elliott or Peter Lorre or Peter Falk, or, you know, sort of a little bit after the, what was the Frank Sinatra gang called? The Rat Pack, yeah. A little bit after that, but not a lot.
Did you know the Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra?
Well, my dad has definitely told me stories about playing billiards with Sammy Davis Jr. and things like that. So, but this is all second, if not third hand for me. But that's when I, you know, sort of recognize, well, this is a different conversation than perhaps a lot of my classmates are having at their dinner table.
Did he talk about for instance, the roller coaster that your father he photographed for This Is Cinerama? Was that something he talked about?
You know, it's funny when you were talking about it and you're saying it was $38 of footage. I was thinking, wow, that was certainly the most profitable piece of filmmaking my dad ever made, because he made a couple of other films which didn't turn out too well or profitably, and critically flopped as well as financially. But I don't think it wasn't something that came up very frequently. He certainly wouldn't have in any way denied it or sort of been particularly humble about it. But yeah, actually now you ask, there were definitely instances when he would sort of find a way to get that in, that, you know, when we were shooting, or when he talked probably more about the Holiday in Spain or Smell-O-Vision movie,
Yeah.
when we were shooting in Alicante and, you know, that kind of thing.
And what can you remember? What kind of things he talked about? Was it technical things or people or?
It was almost always people related, and a little bit of the trouble that it was, because there was I guess a pretty good number of locations, though not much compared to Around the World in 80 Days perhaps, but if I remember correctly, and this film was also made before I was born, he moved our entire family to Spain for maybe a year or more. And so there was a fair bit of the sort of transfer of family to a different country, didn't speak the language. He was producing, working on the movie all the time. There were the wife, my mother, and 2 or 3 kids with them in tow. But as far as film business, I mean, it was mostly about the actors and the crew. Not much technical, which is why I can proudly proclaim my great ignorance of all things technical.
Did you see films in Ireland? When did he bring you to the cinema and your family to the cinema?
Not much. I mean, it was probably 15 kilometers to the nearest cinema, and that one closed down when I was about 11 or 12. So then it would have been 30 plus kilometers to a cinema.
So basically, you never touched cinema again. Did he travel when he moved to Ireland? Did he travel?
He did a little bit, and he talked frequently about projects underway. I mean, I shouldn't underestimate. He produced a film in the late 70s, which was really unsuccessful, but it was The Bell Jar, the Sylvia Plath novel. He was pretty far along in production for a film based on a Joyce Carey novel called Herself Surprised. And he had, I don't know how exactly accurate this is, but my understanding was, in his great way of producing a film, he had already paid David Lean to direct, and he had Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton on board to shoot. And that's when Richard Burton died and the whole production fell apart.
Okay.
So he was trying to make things, he talked often about ideas for ITV, the British Independent Television, or BBC. I don't remember him ever really talking about RTE, which is the Irish broadcaster. But I think he had things going on in his own mind, and you know, he wrote a book about his father and had sort of script notions, but not much actually ever went to screen.
Okay.
But he did travel a bit. You know, he would go to London and to the States.
Yeah. So you were seeing these old or previous colleagues.
Yeah,
Like that,
kept in touch with them to some degree.
How about yourself? Did you ever dream about becoming a movie person?
I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that I did at some point. But it was when I was about 17, and I actually did that. I quit university for a year and went to Los Angeles to go sell my soul. And I got some manual work doing things like building sets and art department production assistant, but the acting thing didn't really work out that well. But it was really funny because my dad, he basically warned everyone in my family away from the business. And nonetheless, one of my older siblings spent about 3 or 4 years in production in New York. And one of the middle siblings, a sister of mine, was a stills photographer for probably 15 or 20 years, very successful. Mm. But he said to me, he said, okay, look, if you want to, and like he thought it was an absolutely horrific idea that I would quit university, go to Los Angeles and try to act. And of course he was right, but he said, okay, look, if you're going to try this, I'll introduce you to some people. And I met, well, I didn't realize at the time, but enormously powerful producers. And so here's this 19-year-old trying not to sound too Irish, which I did at that point, guy walking into an office on the 35th floor of some massive production company, and there's the head of the entire corporation who's looking at me like, hey, your dad's a really nice guy, but I don't know why you're in here talking to me, because I got nothing to do with casting. You know, I've got 15 casting agents working for me. Go sell your wares to them. But, you know, they were very nice, but also I think both the producers and myself were kind of mystified about what was supposed to happen in a meeting like that. But that was my dad. He was sort of like, oh yeah, go for it. Go talk to Ted Mann.
Okay, so you tried your things.
Yeah, that was enough. And honestly, I have seen enough of it and befriended people who are still in the movie business, and I just thought, sorry, I don't have it. I don't have the commitment or the drive or the ability.
No. You quit the movie business, and 5 years ago
I think it quit me a long time before I quit it.
But basically, because I got to know you a few months ago, you ended up in Copenhagen, of all places.
Yes.
How did that come about?
I chose to live there.
Okay.
I mean, that's the simple answer. I've been a school teacher and I've lived in quite a few different countries. And about, whatever it was, 6 years ago, I had moved back to the States, sort of unwillingly, to try to start a business. It didn't work. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to being a school teacher because that's what I do and like doing. And I saw a job opportunity in Copenhagen, and I honestly just prayed. That is the probably #1 city in the world I would like to go work in, and I got it.
I'm glad you did.
So it was good luck.
I have a couple of questions more, then we're going to ask the floor for any questions. I'd like to go back to your daddy, who made this roller coaster
Yeah.
sequence in This Is Cinerama and actually changed the way people see movies to this day. Do you think he had any idea that would happen when he did it?
No, not at all. But I knew this person as someone who had pretty much removed himself from the entertainment business. He had sort of a finger in and had these sort of long-term projects that mostly didn't come to fruition. But he never sort of expressed himself or thought of himself, or at least in my presence, as someone who had made a landmark or historically important film.
He left it behind.
Yeah, I think a lot of what he had done before we moved to Ireland, he was sort of past. Although he liked to tell the stories were never about his achievement or his accomplishment. It was always some other interesting, funny, bizarre actor, producer, director who were sort of at the center of the story. And he may have had some sense of it, but I think were he here, he would be really, I'm just going to say chuffed, I'm trying to think of what the word, but pleased and grateful for the appreciation for what widescreen cinema or Cinerama, Todd-AO became, but it wasn't something that he gloated about or talked about very much.
Okay. And your granddad, you never met him, obviously, because he died in 58, but you just mentioned a moment ago that some of your siblings you went to New Mexico.
Yeah, I'll tell the story in this minute. I was just thinking about that, and I think that's part of what my father's sort of perspective on things was. I think he very much lived his life in the shadow of his father, who was such a notorious, famous, if not infamous figure, that what my father had done, which was shoot some film ends on a roller coaster, seemed pretty small beans in his own mind to the, marrying Elizabeth Taylor and winning various Academy Awards and producing a lot of successful Broadway shows. His sense of himself might be a lot different than someone else's from the outside. But yeah, my grandfather loomed very large in the household as sort of, there's still, I have younger siblings who also would never have met him, and many of the people in my family have numerous pictures of my grandfather, watercolors from, or storyboards from his films and things like that up in their houses. But March, if I have the dates correct, March 22nd, 1958 was the day his plane crashed. And so I think it was March 22nd, 2008, 50 years to the day, I happened to be in New Mexico, and one of my sisters lives in New Mexico. So we made a pilgrimage to go see the site of the plane crash. And then it's a really remote area. I think at some point it wasn't quite as remote because it was near, I think it's Route 66, which was a bit of a tourist attraction, but there's nothing there now. There's a sort of strange old tourist attraction that didn't seem to be getting any business. But so my sister had contacted these people, their land, or they own the land where the plane had crashed. And the guy there said, yeah, of course, if you're genuinely related to this person, I can show you, to Mike Todd, I can show you where the plane crashed. But I'm not really keen on doing this because we still have people who come and ask to find the plane site. And I always misdirect them because I just think it's not so pleasant. And there was a bit of a hubbub or furor when the plane crash happened originally. There was a bunch of people who came to find Elizabeth's diamond ring or whatever it was, that sort of remnants from this plane crash. And they had the plane buried over. And so he himself, the guy who owned the property, actually the guy who found or was first there, he was still there. He was in his late 80s. He wasn't physically well enough to go with us, but we talked to him a little bit later. But his son said, yeah, we had the whole thing buried over. He was a kid at the time of the accident. In any case, he takes us out to this site, and it's really in the middle of nowhere, a couple of miles from a dirt track through desert brush and whatnot. And we get there, and he says, well, look, there's nothing really here, you know, this has been buried over. And we walked around a little bit and found there was, I guess through however many decades of frost heaves and whatever else, pieces of the plane that were above the ground. And so I actually took a couple, as did my sister, and my sister put some gambling dice down, and we had a little prayer, thank you ceremony. And just as that was happening, and it's the only time I've ever seen one, this dust devil went right by, and I just thought, oh, okay, that's nice to meet you, Grandpa.
My final question before we hand out the microphone is, you told me that you vaguely remember seeing 70mm in Cinerama when I interviewed you previously, but you weren't really quite sure that you've seen it.
Yeah.
But now you've seen it.
Exactly.
What's your impression?
Well, yeah, I felt so dizzy on that roller coaster ride and slightly nauseous on the ski trip and the airplane ride, and I thought, I have not experienced this version of these films, definitely not in widescreen.
And what about West Side Story, the full-blown 70mm musical?
Well, I was saying to someone, I can't remember who was sitting next to me earlier, it's like, wow, I used to think I really disliked this movie, but it's actually really good. So I don't know if I should thank 70mm or just for another opportunity to see it. But I was thinking, oh, West Side Story, no, I don't think so. But that was a really wonderful viewing of it.
We have a microphone, so if any of you in the audience have any questions for Oliver, this is the opportunity if we can turn it on. Mark has a question.
When I went to school, I won't tell you how long ago that was, but it was a long time ago, there was an American kid there. And because he'd just come over from America, there was this tremendous charisma. Everybody wanted to talk to him. He had the latest jokes and everything else, you know. But gradually, as his American accent faded, so did, you know, interest from the rest, and he became as dull as the rest of them. I was wondering, maybe, do you have a similar experience when you went to school in Ireland? Did you find that, oh yeah,
yes,
they want to know about...
Simple answer is yes.
This glamorous, exotic country.
But I mean, it was almost too bizarre in the sense that, and I had no sense of this at the time, but I do in retrospect. These are rich Americans, no doubt about it. If my father was well enough to do, he was in his early 40s, to think, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go, and literally he did this, rent a castle in rural Ireland and live the rest of my life there. And this is in a village where there were about 500 people. So it was such a disjunction. I don't think they really even knew. Okay, they knew what an American was, but the idea that there's some rich movie producer American, and I had no idea what is a poor Irish farmer's kid going to be like. So it was such a clash that nobody really came up to me. Actually, I do remember the first day I was at school when everyone said to me, "Waheja, Waheja, Waheja," and I kept saying, "Yes, yes, yes." And they were asking me, what age are you? And they must have just thought I'm a moron because I kept saying yes. Waheja, yes, yes. But the disjunction or dissonance sort of decreased over time. And I now sound really American, I'm quite aware. But by the time I had finished secondary school, I sounded much like everyone else I was in school with.
Do you have dual citizenship?
No.
So you're Irish?
No.
You're United States?
Yes.
Okay. Oliver, I'd like to thank you.
Yes, and thank you
for your time. I don't know if you drink red wine, but here it is. Small token of appreciation from Ola and myself, and I'm sure from the audience.
Thank you very much.